Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, narrated by Disney, Oracle Lucasfilm, whichever way you slice it, Legends. Today, I have for you, and it'll most likely be backwards, but Shadows of the Empire by Steve Perry. That should be the thumbnail on here too, but man, this was such a big deal when this came out. Before I even get into the story, this book was a big deal. This is one of the first multimedia projects. We have The Force Unleashed around 2008, and then we have the entire Clone Wars multimedia project. But this one was the first. It's speculated, nowhere confirmed necessarily, but this is probably a big reason for the special editions, like just something to tide people over until the special editions came out, because George was going to make the prequel trilogy. And so he wanted to keep people hyped up on Star Wars. So he commissioned a book to be made, a video game of the same name to be made, and a comic book to be made of the same name, all to get people excited for the upcoming prequel films. And then also, while going off the hype of this book, to re-release the original trilogy in theaters with, the new special edition CGI, which I'm neither here nor deny to discuss whether or not it was good, bad, somewhere in between. I'm not here to have that debate. I don't mind the special editions. If you do, I understand. I get it. But I'm just talking about the history of this book and where this came about. But yeah, this is written by Steve Perry. We have seen many books. If you've been reading alongside me or looking at my reviews, we've seen a bit of Steve Perry before. Steve Perry really likes to work with Michael Reeves. And in MedStar, we had these two working together, Michael Reeves and Steve Perry. In Death Star, we had Michael Reeves and Steve Perry working together. But this one is just Steve Perry. Steve Perry's written a lot of things in a whole bunch of stuff. I know, for instance, one of the ones he has done a bit in has been the Aliens franchise. And so he's a pretty prolific writer as well. And yeah, it's interesting, the history of this book. It's so crazy how that all came about. But this is, of course, set in between episodes 5 and 6. This was actually, George Lucas did read this one, and he said, had this not been written so late, in the late 90s, had he not already been planning to work on the prequel trilogy, that he'd actually consider making this a story, set in between episode 5 and 6. That's how much he enjoyed it. So that says a lot, to get the creator to say something like that. But what is this book about? Well, of course, Lando, Luke, Chewie, Leia are still looking for Han Solo, because they know that Boba Fett has him. They know that he's going to Jabba, but it's not necessarily that he's going to go to his palace, so they're trying to figure that all out. Also, Luke is transitioning. One of the biggest issues I had with in between episode 4 and 5 is that while the stories could be fun in that era, in the Rebellion era, there's a lot of fun things to be had, there's no real development, because all the development for Luke from episode 4 to 5 comes from episode 5, right? Like, by episode 5, you can tell, that maybe he's a little bit more seasoned of a soldier, because he's been fighting this war for 3 years, and he's obviously really close to Han and Leia by this point. That's all you really get, and he is slightly a little bit better with the Force. He's able to pick up that lightsaber, but he's still Luke from episode 4. It's not until he goes to Dagobah that true character development really happens. And so the stories in the Rebellion era always felt kind of stagnant. But with episode 5 to 6, you have a stark contrast. Right? In episode 6, it's not that Luke is a completely different character, but he feels very different. He's more confident. He's way better at his abilities than he was in episode 5 in a 6-month time span. And he's just so different from where he was at episode 5 that's why you could even fear that he might come to the dark side. You know, that was the whole thing with him wearing all black. But then, you know, when he opens up the sleeve of his coat or whatever, there's the white in there or the gray in there showing that he's still, you know, a good guy. But you don't really get to see that development. It just, episode 6, he's like that. So this book can kind of help smooth that over. Now, we're talking about Shadows of the Empire, so I'm not going to get too sidetracked. However, I don't like hypocrisy and not playing devil's advocate. So, just want to say, real quick, short thing. I know, off topic, but I know certain people are going to watch these. So, when we get to Dark Nest again, which is, you know, going to be a while down the line, New Jedi Order, Unifying Force, Jason acts a certain way. There's a 5-year jump, which is way longer than a 6-month gap. And Jason is not the same by Dark Nest. And people were like, well, that's stupid, that's lazy writing, blah, 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 right? But I hear nobody complain about Luke's sudden change in episode 6. So if we're going to be intellectually consistent, if you're going to say I don't have a problem with Luke just being like that by episode 6, then you can't say that about Jason Solo. Now, if you say you have a problem with Luke also just being like that in 6 months, then by all means, at least you're consistent in your views. But don't be a hypocrite. Don't be uneven with your takes. I'll leave that there. Anyway, that being said, so there's a lot of Luke development here. But the main players, the things you're really coming here to see, the things that really drive this plot is, or I feel, is Vader, Caesar, and Palpatine. Vader and Caesar don't get along. If you're watching my reviews, we looked at the source book for Shadows of the Empire, and we learned that 10 years prior to this, that Vader was working on experiments on Falleen, and Caesar's family died in the process. So Caesar has a personal grudge against Darth Vader. Darth Vader himself doesn't like Caesar because he tries to get too close and chummy with the Emperor. Who is Caesar? Caesar is the leader of Black Sun. Basically, the Hutts are kind of the mob bosses, if you will, of the Star Wars universe, right? Jabba just being the main one we see, but there's other Hutts in the galaxy. Most of them are criminals, right? But the other big organization within all of that, there's, you know, the Hutt family and their clans and their criminal organizations, and then there's Black Sun. That's the other big one. We saw Black Sun in MedStar. We saw Black Sun in Coruscant Nights because, of course, Steve Perry, you know, Michael Reeves, friends. So all that comes about there. I think Black Sun's even doing stuff in the Darth Maul Shadowhunter slightly, or at least Black Sun is accused of being the one who's killing people, even though it's Darth Maul. But Black Sun's been a large organization for a long time now, but Caesar is now in control of it. He is an interesting person, to say the least. I don't want to steal too much from Lore Runner's video. I'm probably going to leave a link in the description to his because it's so good. But Caesar, if I needed to compare it to anyone who knows Star Trek, he's very Vulcan. And by that I mean he's very logical, and he puts logic above all else. He's planning 10 steps ahead. He's making all these schemes and these plots, you know, much like Palpatine does, but he's not like Thrawn, where he really truly is all about, you know, that logic and planning ahead and knowing everything. That's not Caesar. Like, he prioritizes logic and all that, but underneath all that is a lot of emotions that he just chooses to hide. He's not actually cold and calculating like Thrawn is. He he tries to enact that, he tries to live that, but much like the Vulcans, they have this emotional history. They just choose to fight against it and remain with that logical aspect of their personality. So that's what Caesar's kind of doing, except for when he indulges himself in very sexual ways. We'll get to that too. But Caesar is a really interesting villain to put up against Vader because, of course, Vader could crush him like a bug in a one-on-one fight, but they're not really doing that because they both have favor with the Emperor. And, of course, the Emperor, the whole time Zizor's, he's plotting schemes and doing all this. I'm going to defeat Vader. I'm going to become the second in command and whatever. When I'm going to be, Emperor Palpatine's best buddy. And someday I shall rule supreme or whatever. And the whole time, Palpatine knows what he's up to. He's not getting one up on Palpatine. Palpatine knows. He just doesn't care. Because he trusts that Caesar can't be a threat to him. And he is like, yeah, go ahead and mess with, Vader. Either Vader will one-up you, proving to be a better, apprentice, or maybe it's time that I really do just go after his son because you can't even stop a stupid crime lord. So, I love that whole dynamic there. Also, forgot to even mention one of the most important characters of this book, but I wanted to mention the villain first, or the big villain of this book. But now we get to the other character in this book, which, if you've played the video game, you know him already, Dash Rendar. Dash Rendar is Han Solo 2.0. In this book, that is what he is. He becomes more nuanced in Shadow Games if you read the prequels, or the prequel novel Shadow Games, which you kind of like, you can read into this and get more nuance out of it. But of course, that's not what was originally intended. What was originally intended is that Dash Rendar is just a carbon copy of Han Solo. Because we're going to have Han Solo, because he's frozen in carbonite. So we got a character that's very similar to him. Now, I was very disappointed by the fact that Lebo is in here, his robot companion, but is hardly talked about, which I was very disappointed in because he's one of the best parts of Shadow Games. But he's not really mentioned here. He pops up here and there, but that's about it. Dash Rendar's fine in this book. I don't love him like I did in Shadow Games. He's a fine character. He is definitely a Han Solo stand-in, but that being said, he's still a lot of fun. He has a lot of fun interactions with the main cast. Basically, how it goes, though, with these is you have this novel, which focuses on Zizor, Darth Vader, the OT cast. And then if you want, basically, just Dash's perspective on everything, you play the N64 game. If you want to see what Boba Fett was up to during all of this, you read the comic, basically. That's how you get the full picture of what was going on. But it was interesting. I did notice a part in this book where Caesar meets up with his Black Sun Vigos, and we learn that Durga is now a Vigo. If you remember, Durga the Hutt was a main character in A.C. Crispin's books, and he was doing a bunch of stuff, but he started to ask Caesar for favors. Just favors, right? And now, 3 years later, or however long it was, he's now under the employ of Zizor. So, and he will become a character again down the line during the Callista trilogy, but we're nowhere near that. But it was just interesting to see him in such a subservient role. We also get mentions that Dash was on Hoth during the events of Episode 5. We just didn't see him, which was, kind of interesting. Midway through the book, Caesar wants Luke Skywalker dead. For two purposes. One, this is another thing. The book begins with basically a retread of Vader's conversation with Palpatine in Episode 5. The only difference is now that we learn that Caesar was listening in because Palpatine was allowing him to. Caesar knows that Vader is Anakin Skywalker. He's one of the few people who do know that. You know, him, Palpatine, and very few others. It might just be those two who know the truth, that that is Anakin Skywalker. And so when he hears the name Skywalker, when he learns that there's a son of Skywalker, he goes, well, you killed my family, I can kill yours, but it's more than that. Because if I can kill Luke, then not only will it hurt Vader, it will make Vader look weak in front of the Emperor because he failed to do what the Emperor wanted, which was to bring him in, mainly. So that's kind of his whole plot here. So he sends assassins out to kill Luke. And so the heroes, the main cast, they don't know who, they assume it's Vader, but they don't know that. And Luke's like, that doesn't make sense because, you know, he hasn't, I don't think he's told anybody yet, but he knows that that's, you know, Vader told him on some level at least is true, that Vader is his dad. And so he's like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. Why would he send assassins after me? Like, I don't know, maybe because he's trying to kill you for 3 years, but he knows that there's a difference now. So Leia decides, perhaps I should contact Black Sun because they have a wide information network that might extend beyond the Rebel Alliance's information network and may be able to find whoever is trying to kill Luke. Meanwhile, by going there, she's going to the one person that does want to kill Luke, which is Prince Caesar, which we will get to that. I also want to mention, I just thought it was really funny, Lando has a contact forgetting to talk to Black Sun, which is Avaro, who's apparently Greedo's uncle. So there's some expanded mythos for Greedo's backstory. He has an uncle named Avaro, and he could care less that Greedo's dead. And I just feel bad because nobody loved Greedo, apparently, at all. Except for maybe his parents, I guess. But, so, near the end of the book, Leia does get to meet Black Sun. She meets Guri first, which I have not yet mentioned yet because I don't feel she has much of a character. Guri is basically, she's one of the few, if not the only, androids around. And by that, because we have droids all over Star Wars, right? But Guri is the closest analogous I can make to it, or analogy I can make to it, I guess. Guri is like the androids from Blade Runner, where they look human, they feel human, but they aren't human, right? And that's kind of the thing with Guri. I mean, she's very loyal to Caesar. I don't know if it's hinted that she actually loves him or not. I can't really figure out her character. It seems like there might be more to her than meets the eye, but the book doesn't delve enough into her character for me to really know that. She follows Caesar, she's obedient to Caesar, she does whatever Caesar wishes, even if she feels that it doesn't logically make sense. And I think Guri could have been really interesting, but I don't think they do anything with her to make her very interesting. So that's kind of disappointing. That being said, she meets up with Guri. Leia gets she has to go undercover because she's on Coruscant, because that's where Caesar's palace is. So she has to she has to pretend to be this bounty hunter, and so does Chewbacca. He has to get like a buzz cut and dye his hair and wear like all this like armor pieces and stuff. It's really funny. And she wears the bounty hunter outfit that we see in episode 6 that she uses when she's saving Han. So there's some continuity there. But we get to the worst part of the book. Now, I'm not inconsistent, and I'll prove to you why. Prince Caesar And Leia, Prince Caesar has the extreme hots and attraction for Leia. Like, he really wants to get in her pants. And the book really harps on this, which, I know most kids aren't going to be reading this book, but Star Wars is usually family. Here's the thing, because I know people are going to say this in the comments because they've seen my other reviews. Denning verse, right? The Darkness trilogy, the Helix, whatever. The most we get in there is that Jaina woke up in her underwear and bra, right? That's usually the PG-13 going about it, right? And people just kind of automatically know what's going on. But it doesn't say, oh yeah, freaking the Helix were nesting inside her bra or something. Like, it doesn't talk like that. And then even the most egregious thing that happened in post New Jedi Order was there's this character, she's a bit older than this other character, and she's a villain, right? So, but the kid's a teenager, so she's like, if I can seduce the kid and give me the information I want, then I get the information I want. It's not, to me, it didn't come across as, oh, I actually want to do this with the child. It was, oh, this kid's, in their hormonal teenage years, and I can use this to get information. Not that she actually planned on doing anything. At least that's not the vibe I got from it. This is completely different. He's actively trying to make her go against her will and have sex with him. It's harped upon. It's harped upon multiple times. And then freaking Leia, her mind's being warped by Prince Caesar because all Fallings have like these pheromones that they like give off. So like everybody finds them irresistible. And so poor Leia, she's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? But her body like wants it, right? And so it's just uncomfortable because that inside, in her heart, Leia doesn't want it, but her body has no control. And Caesar just blatantly, like, you're inside his head for like half this book. He just wants to get in her pants. It's nothing more than like a victory lap. Like, can I do it? Can I get her to open her legs for me? Like, it's too much. It's too much. It's too much. It's not necessary. I mean, maybe that was a point for you to feel uncomfortable, but I just felt so bad for Leia. And she even blamed herself afterwards for it. Like, it's her fault. I gotta be honest, if I was in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, even with a Wookiee banging on the door, I don't know if I would have, snapped out of it. I mean, geez, props to Leia, because, Han's very important to her, and that's able to keep her from succumbing any further. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just an inconsistent brat and I'm a hypocrite, but I really don't think I am. I think there's a clear difference between what Denning verse has done, between what this book has done. And I just felt very uncomfortable the whole time. Like the stuff that happens in other books is like a blink and you'll miss it. Besides the 4-1 I mentioned with the teenager. But even that didn't feel like the bad guy actually intended on doing anything. So I don't know. It just, because I get to be in his mind, and his mind, and I can hear this pervert talking about what he wants to do to Leia, and it's just a lot. It's the most uncomfortable part of the book. You could probably take it out and not too much would change. That being said, it's here. But yeah. But that being said too, the ending's pretty fun. All of our heroes band together, escape. Vader blows up the palace because he finally got all the evidence he needs on Caesar, conspiring against him. And we get ready for episode 6. I forgot to mention also Luke makes his green lightsaber in here, so that's also another bit of continuity. There was a deleted scene in episode 6, but since it's a deleted scene, it doesn't count. But here we have the actual building of his green lightsaber, which is really cool. Yeah, and Lando. I forgot to mention Lando. Lando, is definitely just a side character in here, but Lando's written very well, though. He does act very much like himself. There's a lot of good moments with Lando in here. So do I recommend this book? Yes. I'm just forewarning that one scene with Caesar, it's, especially if you're a girl, I imagine it being very uncomfortable. Just very uncomfortable. it's not fun. That being said, there also might be a young adult version of this book, which would most definitely not have that scene in there, because it's a lot. But if you want it, this is it. This is the. I sure hope that George Lucas didn't want to put that scene in the movies, because that's a bit much. But you know him and his naked Twi'lek picture that he approved of. Um, that's an inside joke, but it's a thing. You can look it up. George Lucas. Yeah. Anyway, the episode 5.5 essentially of the Star Wars Expanded Universe, the novel taking place in between Empire and Jedi. I do recommend it. I think overall this is a good book, and I think you have a lot of fun with it. That's pretty much it, guys. Plus, if you go back and read other things like, the Bounty Wars trilogy or A.C. Crispin's Han Solo trilogy, you're going to be like, dang, this guy. I remember this guy using Shadows of the Empire. Because he appears here and there. So, I do think you'll get a lot of fun out of that. But yeah, until next time, guys, may the Force be with you.